Welcome back to the Tempo Storm Hearthstone Wild Meta Snapshot. In the post-playoff season, both Wild and Standard competitive players are clashing in the highest ranks of the Wild format, resulting in great changes to the Wild tier list. There have been many different influences on the latter, and at the moment, the meta is more volatile than ever before. However, a handful of rather consistent decks in tiers 1 and 2 have stood out, and the interplay between them has ultimately been shaping the meta. We will be focusing on tiers 1 and 2 for this Tempo Storm Wild Meta Snapshot Breakdown, as these decks are the strongest and most popular ones that you'll come across. Notably missing from the top end of our tier list are most combo decks, as they're currently living on the fringe of the format. Some examples are Mill Druid, APM Priest, and Mechathun Warlock, which can find successful matchups against top control decks. However, they did not make it on the tier list for two reasons. First being that they're radically unfavored against any aggro deck in Wild, which has a large presence on the ladder at the moment. The second reason is that there are very few players using combo decks on the ladder due to the ability to inevitably lose against aggro. There may be a unicorn combo deck out there, but from what's been played on the ladder, the mystery combo deck will not be contributing to the end of season rankings. It's important to note that combo decks are not impossible to play on the ladder, nor are they obsolete. For this Tempo Storm Wild Meta Snapshot, they just don't fit in the current meta and are more likely to find appearances in tournament play. Going down the tier list, we have Odd Rogue once again standing alone as the best deck in the format. The deck finds explosive success against most matchups in tiers 1 and 2, having an edge on the 5 control decks as well as its counterpart, Kingsbane Rogue. There has not been much change with the deck, as the list is fairly refined, but tech cards have rotated in response to these meta shifts. Ziliax has become a staple in the deck list, as being able to play a 5-mana taunt with Rush allows you to trade on board while maintaining control. Void Ripper, Ironbeak Owl, and Vicious Fledgling are other cards that have alternated between competitive Odd Rogue lists, but many players are also shying away from Shady Dealer. While 5/4 stats are good, they ultimately do not impact the board as much as more proactive cards such as the previous 3 we mentioned. Reno defends its position as second best in the meta. Looking across the field, it has some fairly strong matchups, but the main factor is that it's never out of any game against its unfavorable matchups. Optimal resource management is key to prospering with this deck. Rin has become a staple card, as the seals into Azari the Destroyer helps to mitigate some of the tough matchups against control decks. The infinite combo of Bran Bronzebeard, Zola the Gorgon, and Baleful Banker allows you to beat decks in fatigue, which has become more relevant against the uptick in control decks. Even Shaman has jumped back up into tier 1 in response to the most recent meta shifts. While control decks have a bit of edge on deck, even Shaman currently crushes aggro decks, and with Kingsbane Rogue popping up more frequently, the deck has gained a foothold on the meta solely due to this matchup. When playing a control deck, even Shaman demands consistent answers, and if you miss 1 or 2 removal turns, the tempo deck can easily snowball out of control. The burst potential with Crackle and the ability to shut down taunts with Devolve also make this deck a relevant threat on the ladder, forcing your opponent to have specific clears. Against aggro, its strong 2-drops can take the board early, and the big 4-drops along with Thing from Below are extremely solid follow-ups. Odd Warrior remains in its spot as the last tier 1 deck. The meta has some extremely strong aggro decks that more players are relying on. Odd Warrior capitalizes on having polarizing strong matchups against these decks. Against the rest of the field, it has a harder time. The deck can play toward fringe outs against other control decks by using Deathlord, Azalina Soul Thief, and Fatigue. The big thing about Odd Warrior is that it's very similar to the traditional Control Warrior lists, which was very consistent against aggro, yet inconsistent against control. It's the classic anti-aggro deck. At the moment, Odd Warrior is a good meta call, but if aggro rogue archetypes and even Shaman decrease in popularity, the deck will have a harder time finding relevance on the Wild ladder. That may not be the case as aggro Kingsbane Rogue jumps up to the top of tier 2. The evolution of the deck to an aggro archetype gave the deck a bit more game against aggro, which is finding greater relevance on the ladder, thus causing aggro Kingsbane Rogue to become more popular. The main card pushing this deck is Raiding Party, which is one of the best draw cards in the game, giving you refill along with your growing weapon. The built-in high roll factor can make this deck win against any other on the Wild ladder. However, it also has the ability to run out of momentum and can draw dead in the early game, resulting in virtual game losses. This ultimately impacts the deck's win rate and keeps it out of tier 1, but the ability to high roll crazy wins puts it at the top of tier 2. Despite the absence of other combo decks from the tier list, Q-Block pops into tier 2 of this snapshot as it finally hits its stride. The deck has always been an underlying presence in the format, but really hasn't been used well until recently. With the way that the meta is shaping up, it seems to be a good anti-control deck in ways other combo decks have failed to be. It's almost Warlock's version of Big Priest, being able to cheat out minions early with Voidcaller and Skull of the Man'ari, and being able to summon duplicate minions with Cube and Blood Reaver Gul'dan. The deck struggles against aggro, but it's a prime candidate to counter control decks such as Odd Warrior, Reno Warlock, and Big Priest. The main difference between this deck and some of the combo decks that we excluded from the tier list is that the deck has the opportunity to beat aggro more reliably, with turn 5 Void Lords shutting the most aggressive decks down on the spot. While this is draw dependent, Q-Block is one of the best anti-control decks in the format at the moment, and can survive without finding Skull of the Man'ari on turn 5. It's positioned to do well in the way the meta is shifting as of this Tempo Storm Wild Meta Snapshot. The meta is fairly polarizing, and there is no one solution to counter the metagame. Ultimately, we're in one of the classic rock, paper, scissors situations where at a high level, aggro decks are contested by control decks, which are countered by anti-control decks, which fall weak to aggro. Obviously, there are discrepancies between this simple model and the actual ladder, but when approaching your pocket of the meta, your best chance at success is to play one step ahead by playing the counter to the playstyle that you're seeing the most. For example, if you've been seeing a lot of Q-Block and Kingsbane Rogue, aggro decks like Even Shaman and Odd Rogue are a good choice. If you see a lot of Odd Rogue and Even Shaman, play a control deck like Odd Warrior. And if you see control decks, play anti-control decks like Q-Block and Kingsbane Rogue. The wild meta has been shifting, and we are about to shift into second gear with the end of the season approaching. With some of the best Hearthstone minds throwing their lot into the format, the top wild players are responding in kind, and camping or grinding towards a top 100 legend finish. Stay tuned as the format gets pushed to its limits in the coming weeks. Thank you for watching our Wild Meta Snapshot Breakdown. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to subscribe for more Tempo Storm news and Hearthstone content. Thanks for watching.